are the Nagas? The Nagas are a Tibeto-Burman speaking people made up of many tribes with different languages, customs, even cultures, and yet all claiming to be a people called Naga, a name obviously given to them by others. The tribes live on the easternmost Himalayas, along the Patkai and Barail mountain ranges, now found along northwestern Myanmar and in the Indian states of Nagaland, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. Despite their diversity, the Naga tribes can be broadly divided into two groups, the kilted Nagas and the non-kilted Nagas. This division runs across tribe and state boundaries. What is interesting is that the Japanese routes from Burma to Kohima mostly passed through the lands of the kilted Naga group called the Tengimi, although the Japanese also crossed Tangkhul tribe villages. The Battle of Kohima has been variously described as the Dunkirk of the East and compared to Stalingrad in Europe and El Alamein in the desert as turning points in the Second World War. Earl Mountbatten, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Southeast Asia, described the Battle of Kohima Imphal as probably one of the greatest in history. In 2013, British historians voted it as the greatest battle in the history of Britain. But for the Nagas, it was simply the Japan War.
If the Japanese did not come to Naga Hills in the first place, there would be no Battle of Kohima. So our people call this war the Japanese War, Japan Reho.
How did the Nagas get caught in this war? British colonialism first set foot in Naga country in 1832. In 1878, they shifted their headquarters to Kohima, and by 1880 they had effective control over the western Naga tribes after the Battle of Kohima. By the time the First World War came, the British administration could mobilize several thousand Nagas into the labor corps and sent to Europe and Mesopotamia. When the Second World War broke out, the British started mobilizing the Naga labor corps again. Sosang Temba Longkamer, who is 98 years old from Longsa village, was one of 50 levies from Ongpangkong range who cut the Burma road towards Salween River. Vikayana Nagi of Jotsama village went to Manipur as labor commander.
We cut the Burma road from Palel to Salween River. When the Japanese started bombing Imphal, we returned home. I also worked with Kevichasa as DC Kohima in cutting the Jotsama bypass road. Later, I was interpreter to DC Lombard and General Grover.
In 1942, Burmese and Indian refugees started coming from Burma. By early 1944, the refugees were in full flow. Kayan Pusha was about 17 or 18 years old when the Japan War came.
Our first inkling of the coming of the war was the arrival of the refugees from Burma. By March 1944, so many refugees were coming on the Indo-Burma road, walking all the way as there was no transport available. The ordeal was too great, and many of them died of starvation and exhaustion, no longer able to continue. But some managed to go to Dimapur and Assam.
So, the Nagas knew the Japanese were coming. But the speed with which things started happening would take them by surprise. Also, in the initial days, the scene in Kohima was one of utter confusion everywhere. For instance, the withdrawal of Brigadier Warren's 161st Brigade to defend the Dimapur stores caused near panic, and people started leaving Kohima and going to the nearby villages. Chrysotio Sacher, retired educationist from Kohima village, was there.
When the Japanese were about to arrive, the British Army vacated Kohima and went to Dimapur. So, we had to run to neighboring villages to seek shelter. But when the British 2nd Division came, they proved too powerful for the Japanese. In the fighting, our village was reduced to ashes, and so many lost their lives.
Why did the Nagas decide to help the British?
We heard the British soldiers had asked the then Deputy Commissioner C.R. Pause to leave Kohima because of the impending war. But he refused to leave, saying, "You are free to go, but I will not leave. I will not abandon my people, and I will sacrifice my life for the Nagas." So all the Dubashis stayed with DC.
Nagas, they had great respect for the honesty, good sense of the British, and the British administrators were fighting the Japanese. Their friends became their war, so they just naturally helped their friends.
Very soon, war was knocking on the gates of Kohima.
We had heard that fighting was going on in Jessamy. Then, on 2nd April 1944, the British withdrawing from Imphal side reached Viswama. The officers scanned the areas towards Mao and Chakasang side through binoculars. Then they proceeded towards Kohima. The next morning, when we got up, we found the Japanese already in the village. Obviously, they had arrived on 2nd April night. I saw their uniforms were clean and their skins were fair. On 3rd April itself, they marched towards Kohima. The next day, 4th April, we learned that firing had started in Kohima.
The Battle of Kohima had begun. Torrential rain, thick jungle, hunger and disease would all take their tolls very soon. Heuzito Singh Rao was about 12 years old when the Japanese came.
The INA and about 3,000 Japanese soldiers came from Manipur side, crossing the Barak River. After the Japanese came, the British started bombing the village. I remember 6 planes came and dropped water pitcher-sized bombs from planes that looked like giant fish. Because of the terrain, only one house was burned from the bombing, but 2 persons died from the fire. I used to collect hay for the Japanese and got paid 2 rupees. When the Japanese left our village, they made all the male members carry their loads to Pulebaze.
Besuvei Suro was about 15 years old at the time of the Japan War.
The Japanese came to our village on 3rd April 1944 from Jessamy and Peg side. When we first saw them, they looked like an army of ants. They also had horse train. In the beginning, the Japanese were polite, but later they became difficult. Apart from taking paddy, they killed a lot of cattle, and killing pigs was an everyday affair. They would sometimes line up the villagers and make them kneel, threatening to behead them. The villagers would challenge them to do it. Luckily, only one man was actually killed.
Pukoho was studying in class 3 when the war came.
When the Japanese arrived in our village, they turned the Baptist church into a school where they taught 1, 2, 3, ABC and the Japanese national anthem.
Sa sui su si so na nu nu ni no ichi ni son shi zero ji ni akaku hinomaru somete. Tomorrow Kohima finish, overcome Kohima. Kohima master.
Kohima master, they would say, and force everyone they meet to carry their loads. The Japanese objective was clearly to capture Kohima. As the fighting spread, all the nearby villages were displaced. But Jakama people did not run because our jungles were filled with Japanese soldiers. General Sato himself camped here at Sokapezu. As Jakama was the Japanese headquarters, they also printed their currency here. 50 pies, rupees 1, 2, 5 and 10 denominations were printed. Viswama people also claim that Japanese war money was printed in their village at Vinol's house.
Vingotsore Katso remembers carrying paddy 3 times to Visema village for the Japanese. They would also pound paddy and gather wild vegetables. The Japanese were also very fond of local tobacco. They consumed even the stems and stumps. I was angry when the Japanese carried off our food stock whenever they liked, but I was really hurt when they fed my entire standing crops to the horses. The crops I had worked for all year round and was meant to feed my family for a year. Taking away food from starving people and feeding animals is incomprehensible to us, and we consider it taboo. Ketso Piene was nearly 30 years old when the Japanese arrived in the village from Chakasang side.
Our villagers had built a defense perimeter by building fences and punjis around the village and closing the village gates as in olden days when there was war. When the Japanese came, they cut everything down with their swords. Most male members of the village had to help the Japanese carry loads. I also went as porter on 3 occasions.
Vimese Tsoche was about 16 years old when the Japanese arrived on the 4th of April.
Most Japanese were billeted in the homes of people. Our family hosted 5 Japanese, including 2 women soldiers. The women soldiers carried short guns, while the men carried long rifles. Apart from feeding the billeted soldiers, the village was requested to contribute 100 tins of paddy, which were carried to Jakama village. They paid 2 rupees and later 3 rupees for 1 tin of paddy. The villagers also collected wild vegetables and edible herbs, for which they would pay 50 pies or 1 rupee.
When the Japan War came, Vimedo Rutsa was about 14 or 15 years, and he used to herd cattle.
On the day war reached us, our villagers were all in the fields. We were told not to go back to the village, but to seek shelter in nearby villages. Our villagers went to Rasoma, Nerhema, Chechama, etc. Later on, slowly we were moved towards Western Angami area. I went with my grandfather to Jotsama, while my father went to Kohima. I remember we used to go down to Zaza River on the Dimapur-Imphal road to collect our rations, which the British provided. My brother Mesizole, or Siu as we called him, was staying with Deputy Commissioner C.R. Pause as his interpreter and driver. When war came, Pause refused to leave. So they stayed in a bunker. Soon food ran short. This was difficult, but the lack of drinking water was the most intolerable. Whenever there was an opportunity, particularly at night, Siu would run down to Sanyahudzalo, a spring well towards present Naga Hospital, and bring back water to drink. Meanwhile, our parents were worried sick as they got no word about my brother Siu. With continuous bombardment and firing all the time, it was not possible to go looking for him. Finally, after about 2 weeks, word came that Siu was still alive. My parents eagerly waited for him to come home. Instead, Pause took him to Dimapur to recover his health, and he came home only much later.
As the Japanese began withdrawing from Kohima, the British started a march to relieve Imphal. But en route, each village had to be won. Visema village is a good example.
A 9-day battle was fought in Visuma to clear the Japanese and to proceed to Imphal. Many houses were destroyed. Many people also died. Our villagers were dispersed to different places and we returned only at the end of August.
As the Japanese were withdrawing from Kohima, the 2nd Battalion of the Assam Regiment was brought up to Kohima as reinforcement and stationed between TCP Gate and Naga Hospital. Havildar Javise Vihenyo was there.
Kohima was totally destroyed and seemed devoid of all life. The people were shell-shocked and seemed unable to talk. The trees had no leaves or branches, and even the stumps left standing were pock-marked with bullet and shell holes. Likewise, the few houses still left standing. Kezike area was completely bombed out and Kohima village was burned to ashes. The entire place looked eerie and like a ghost town. Just after the war, I had gone to Kohima. It was completely destroyed. I saw a lot of rotting corpses. Many of them had maggots climbing out of boots and the feet coming apart at the ankles. The stench was horrible. I also saw rifles and other weapons piled up and burning like funeral pyres.
After the war, the British helped the villagers to rebuild.
The British provided us with everything like CGI sheets, nails, pots and pans, and even spoons and ladles. Cash compensation was also paid. Nearby villagers came and helped us cut a proper road in the village. Because of the war, we were not able to cultivate. The British brought rice seedlings from Dimapur to help us. This rice we used to call Rosholha, meaning Russian rice.
Despite much hardship and loss of property, starvation deaths were not reported. This may be due to Naga ability to live off the land and survive on very little. But British rations had made all the difference. There was no report of epidemic or plague, although the people suffered from many ailments, particularly those related to privations. The Japanese, of course, had their sympathizers. The Naga nationalist leader A.Z. Pizzo was said to have made a pact with the Japanese and INA leader Subhash Chandra Bose to overthrow the British from the Naga hills. Some people believe that it was because of this pact that the Japanese did not misbehave with Naga women. Here are some comments on the Japanese.
Some of our village leaders were anxiously waiting for the Japanese to come because of some rumor that if they come, they would chase the British from our land and give us our independence.
When the Japanese came, they said we were all Mongoloid people and requested our help. Some Nagas also said the Japanese were our elder brothers. So I used to help the Japanese. Many times I stayed in their camp for days together. Many soldiers used to go and fight in Kohima during the night and return early the next morning. We had very cordial relations with the Japanese. My guests used to go and fight in Kohima. They would leave around 3 p.m. and come back early next morning. We used to present them with vegetables. Sometimes they would sing songs to us and teach us 1, 2, 3 in Japanese. Before leaving, the Japanese doctor gave medicines to the villagers. Hamoto, the military commander, one of our guests, gave us a shirt as a memento. We had heard stories about Japanese atrocities before they arrived. But when they came, they were actually very nice to our people. So the villagers helped them.
In 1999, some Naga sympathizers set up a memorial to honor the memory of the Japanese soldiers who fought at Kohima. This memorial stands at Kiherer, at the foot of Pulebaze Peak in Jotsuma.
Although Jakama was the Japanese headquarters, our people turned against the Japanese because they did whatever they liked with our food stock, including feeding their horses, constant stealing, particularly by those accompanying the Japanese, forced labor, and especially after they beheaded in public a British officer who was kept prisoner in the village. Because the Naga people were so pestered by the Japanese for food, they got fed up and started reporting to the British. As each and every movement of the Japanese was known to the British, they could no longer withstand the combined forces of Nagas and British.
In the words of Vimedo, respected Naga elder,
the Japanese lost the war because they did not bring their tiffin.
We know that during World War I, few thousands Nagas have gone up to France, and this has given little consciousness of our identity to the Nagas, which led to the formation of Naga Club in 1918, and also submission of the memorandum to the British Sejong Commission, etc. In 1944, the Kohima battle has transformed the Nagas totally, which led to the formation of NNC in 1946, 9-point agreement met with the government of India in 1947, and also declaration of Naga Independence Day in 1947, followed by the Naga plebiscite, which was taken in 1951. And I believe these are all the direct impact of the Second World War. Kohima battle has opened the eyes of the Nagas to our outside world. Although we have suffered a lot, but this has given an impact to the Naga society in the field of education, economy, as well as our self-identity.
Nobody knew Kohima, but having the World War fought in Kohima, naturally we came into the world picture. We were blessed in the world map.
Without this war, Naga would be living in darkness, without any knowledge of the outside world. Even though the Japanese took our rations and the British burned down our villages into ashes, they wake us from our sleep of ignorances and fears of enemies. After the war, our people became brave like Japanese and educated like British.
One of the first things that affected Nagas was that it suddenly opened their awareness of a bigger world. It was the first time for many of the people to see an airplane. For the first time, they saw vehicles. For the first time, they saw bulldozers. For the first time, they saw some monsters leveling hillocks even. After the war, so many different kinds of people came, went, stayed, did, then it affected the moral character of quite a few women. As far as touching human life, I find that the depth of feeling, the depth of perception, depth of life became a little shallower, if easier.
The Second World War had shown the Southern Angami people that internal division was destructive and no good to anyone. So, immediately after the Battle of Kohima, leaders of the area formed the Southern Angami Council, SAC, in 1944, with representatives from all the villages. Two very important things happened. The first was setting up a hydroelectric project at Kehora River, which provided electricity to Viswama, Jakama and Kigwema villages for the first time in Naga Hills. The second was the founding of John High School in 1945.
Nagas were caught in a war that was not their own, but all of them became involved. Some helped the Japanese, most helped the British. Deputy Commissioner Paul says one gesture of refusing to abandon his Nagas won the hearts of the people. The loyalty of the Naga government servants was crucial to garnering the support of the vast majority of the Nagas. Japanese pestering helped the British cause. So, while the villages lay burning because of British bombs, the Nagas still helped and supported the British, serving them as soldiers, stretcher bearers, informers, scouts, porters, etc.
My father was with the Chenjit Column 76, and they went behind the Japanese army. My father used to get information from the villagers of the position's strength, such news about the Japanese movement, and then would pass it on to his column officers, and from there the Japanese positions were bombed.
I was injured at the Battle of Jessamy on March 28, 1944, when a 3-inch mortar exploded near me. But we continued fighting. When order came for us to finally withdraw, we fought our way out. I was sent to Shillong for treatment. After 22 days, I returned to Kohima and took part in the assault on Pulebadze. When the Japanese pulled out of Kohima, we went to relieve Imphal. We pursued the Japanese all the way to Burma. For a long time, we fought at Mandalay. Even after the war was over, we continued to stay in Burma to maintain law and order. I returned home only in 1947. As the war was raging in Kohima, my battalion was brought to Zubza. We crossed the Zubza River and climbed the slopes of Merima and moved towards Kohima, fighting a pitched battle around Government High School area. I also fought in present Chandmari area, then occupied by Assam Rifles. After Kohima, we went pursuing the Japanese into Burma. On one occasion, we fought and walked continuously for 32 days.
Nohol Katso, a former village council chairman of Jakama, says he became a British driver in 1942, and by the time the war came, he was also a mechanic and living at the workshop.
After the war in 1945, I was part of the Naga contingent that went to Delhi for the victory parade. We dressed in our traditional dresses, which delighted photographers. The Viceroy spoke very highly of the Nagas and said the war would not have been won without the help of the Naga people. We all felt very proud to be Nagas. Because the Naga people supported the British, the Japanese could not cross Kohima and were ultimately defeated. I believe this is a great contribution of the Naga people.
We supported vigorously either to the Britishers or Japanese, but when the war is over, the Nagas were left alone without deciding our fate. This is one of the unfortunate part where the Nagas have been experiencing.
The British and Japanese came and fought in our land, but after so many years, I still keep wondering about them. Before leaving India, the British should have frankly told the Indians that Nagas are different and Indians are different, and they should respect one another. But they left the Nagas under the Indians. So, we have been fighting all these years, and thousands upon thousands of our people have died. The Japanese, on the other hand, came here to fight the white man without rations. They lived off our people and forced us to work for them. But till today, they have neither justified themselves nor said sorry to the Nagas. We understand they were fighting the British in a war, but surely the Nagas were not their enemies. Their ancestors still lie in our alleys and brooks without proper closure. Is this arrogance or foolishness? Sometimes I wonder what kind of people they are.
Hey!
Atio Measure was regional manager for all the Commonwealth cemeteries in northeast India. His father, Samuel Measure, was the first caretaker of the Kohima War Cemetery. Now Atio's son, Luvi, third generation in the family, looks after the Kohima Cemetery.
Born and being brought up in the war cemetery. The Kohima War Cemetery is a part of my life. My father joined the Imperial War Graves Commission in 1947. He looked after all the war cemeteries in northeast India and a small grave in Darjeeling. And he was responsible for exhuming many remains of the British soldiers from the jungles of Burma and the jungles of Nagaland. On his retirement in 1986, I joined the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Kohima War Cemetery is one of the few war cemeteries in the world where the war cemetery is located on the actual battle site. And the Battle of Kohima is a subject being taught even in the British Army Academy in Sandhurst and the Indian Military Academy. On my retirement, my son Luvi Measure has taken over from me. We are proud to have worked with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
Over the years, I have been collecting the remains of the Second World War in my own home. I want the younger generations to see them and learn the horrors of war. There is one God, one world, and we need to build the peace. Many people, including tourists from abroad, come and look at them. I get much satisfaction when they learn something new or they gain new perspectives.
It was clear that there was general disappointment among the Naga veterans who served the British during the war. Most expected they would be taken care of. Instead, they found themselves caught in the crossfires of the Naga national movement and became targets of both the Naga nationalists and the Indian Army. As many of them died in this new war, the disappointment only deepened. So, it was an important moment when His Royal Highness Prince Andrew came to Kohima in 2012.
Chief Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Her Majesty the Queen, as I think many of you know, is celebrating her Diamond Jubilee and could not think of a better place to ask me to lay a wreath than here in Kohima.
Waiting to meet him were surviving veterans. Javise Vichenyo spoke on their behalf.
Prince Andrew,
I spoke on behalf of the veterans and said, "Sir, we are so happy to see you come back to the land you once ruled. We were your soldiers then. We served you faithfully and we won the war. But no one has helped us. Now most have died, and those of us still living are mostly sick and infirmed. We get a meagre pension of 500 rupees, which is not enough even to meet our medical bills. So we shall be most grateful if you can help us in any way." I believe he spoke to Government of India in Delhi on his way back. Our pension was soon increased from 500 rupees to 3,000 rupees a month. We are all so grateful to him.
While governments may have largely forgotten what happened, the soldiers who actually fought on the ground did not forget. Gordon Graham, who fought in the Battle of Kohima as a captain in 1944, had always felt that they carried a debt of honor to the Naga people for their help during the war.
Reunions and war memorials are fine in their way, but they're concerned always with the past. So we were looking for something which would have meaning in Kohima in the present. And that turned our thoughts to the Nagas, who had been our steadfast and indispensable allies during the battle. And then we thought about the new generation, their children, their grandchildren, and we felt that if we could contribute to their education, it would be a much better memorial than gravestones and reunions and church services in the UK. And that was when the Kohima Educational Trust was founded in 2004.
The Kohima Educational Society, or the KES, was soon formed in Kohima to liaise with the KET. Among the many programs, the school scholarship is the flagship project, which is given out every year. The seeds of friendship sown in the Kohima battlefields have now sprouted and continue to take root after more than 70 years at a people-to-people level.
The Battle of Kohima was not totally in vain. I think it is through such battle that a lot of human values which we thought could not emerge has emerged out. Values like gratitude and values which the war veterans in UK would like to call it a debt of honor. The values have given birth to such actions like the Kohima Educational Trust. A bridge has been built from Nagaland to UK. Through the KET and KES, I think we have been able to reach out to our people and truly express the meaning of the debt of honor or the gratitude.
We are very grateful that the veterans, before they passed away, they had very gratefully remembered the little part the Nagas have done.
What of Naga future and especially of the younger generations? Dr. Krenyo Ultu did her PhD on the Battle of Kohima in Imphal because she felt the Naga side of the narrative has not been said.
Naga future is positively bright as the younger generation, they are not just mere spectator. I mean, they are very vocal. They are ready to raise their voice against all the corruption and the bad governance. And many of them, instead of just sitting and waiting for the government jobs, are ready to take up independent and or engage in different kind of entrepreneurship. So if this present trend continue, I feel that Naga has a very bright and positive future.
The Naga exposure to the outside world in such a big way, their encounter with modern warfare, the introduction to money and trade and commerce, and what followed the departure of the British from their lands, have combined to shatter their traditional community-based society forever. Naga history has been full of wars and conflicts. From headhunting days to fighting the British colonial power, to the 2 world wars, and more recently, the Indo-Naga conflict, which remains unresolved. Most Nagas continue to live in a kind of limbo, often wrestling with the dual identity issue. It is high time that this land of conflicts begin to know peace. For over half a century, unexploded Second World War bombs were used in Kanjang and Lepori villages as church bells calling the faithful to prayer. May these hills be no longer known for the blast of bombs, nor the cry of suffering. May the Nagas come to know peace at last, and may they be able to pursue and fulfill their God-given roles.
Oh,